Friday, January 22nd installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in Silicon Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I've been covering this town longer than anybody. I'm here with our special contributor, Scott Budman, business and tech reporter for NBC Bay Area. As you'll notice again this week, in honor of the California COVID lockdown, we are creating this podcast from our respective homes via Zoom. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove. And our host for this podcast is, as always, the San Jose Business, Silicon Valley Business Journal. See, old timers like me. Okay, so Scott, another huge week.
Yeah, boy, and politics played center stage once again, but in a much different way. And I think everyone's going to be watching the next 100 days really, really closely.
So, looking at the first couple of days with this explosion of executive orders, is there any, and also nominations, is there anything we can predict about the relationship now between Washington and Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I think at first Silicon Valley is going to catch a break because it didn't take those initial executive orders to know that the Biden-Harris administration has its hands full with COVID right now. Right. And it's going to be the dominant thing, and then try to address small business. I think when it comes to Silicon Valley, we'll still see the same themes that we saw sort of towards the end of the Trump administration when it comes to tech companies, not so much government versus big tech, but big tech that has lost a lot of trust by its own hand. Yes. As far as finding out that trillion-dollar companies aren't paying their workers decent wages or healthcare, they're not taking care of them in the time of a pandemic, finding out that big tech is taking your data and monetizing it and putting you in danger when it comes to the information that you're getting and the feedback you're getting on these political issues. So it could be in for a rough time, but I don't think that rough time is going to start right away because the priority is obviously getting everybody healthy and getting the overall economy, especially the smaller businesses, back on track.
There's an interesting theory out there that's starting to emerge that the new Attorney General nominee, Merrick Garland, who was up for Supreme Court and got blocked. He may be the biggest threat that big tech has seen in a long time. He doesn't seem to have a lot of good feelings about tech, and he's the man that will go after them if anybody's going to start doing the trust busting.
Yeah, we saw that the Democratic primary, largely because of Elizabeth Warren, but also to an extent Bernie Sanders, and it sort of rolled down to all the candidates we're talking about, hey, break up big tech, and these companies are just too big and too powerful and too profitable. And again, I think it'll take a while for that to come back, but I wouldn't be surprised if the antitrust momentum that picked up sort of mid-year is kind of picked up again, whether by Merrick Garland or other members of the administration.
Now, I just read a very interesting article by Vivek Wadia. You know him?
Yes.
Yes, interesting guy. I've met him. I've had coffee with him. He's a pretty tough journalist and a very opinionated guy, and he's pretty smart. And he and his son put together an essay for Foreign Policy magazine, and they listed reasons why big tech's going to be in for a rough time over the next few years. And I'll give you the list. Self-regulation has failed. In the sense, we had a social contract with big tech. We'll leave you alone if you, be responsible, and we'll make you the most powerful companies on earth, but you got to behave yourself. And apparently, it's pretty obvious that self-regulation hasn't worked. Second, trust is broken. Vivek writes, across the industry, the promise made by the titans are meeting skepticism. We just don't believe them anymore. And they didn't help their cause with those congressional testimonies, where we found out later on that, that wasn't quite the truth. Okay, the backlash is bipartisan. We're seeing both sides of the aisle unhappy with tech in one way or another. Scrutiny is increasing inside of Silicon Valley. We're looking at the backlash of Google employees, for example, on certain decisions. The entire Democratic Party has moved to the left. And they're not going to be that, thrilled about big business. That's always been the bugaboo. The public has a better understanding of tech's dark side. they're seeing it. This isn't the glorious new world that we were predicting in 1980. This isn't Jetsons. This is a whole lot more dysfunctional. The future of labor and inequality is at stake. By all indications, the Biden administration is, besides Keystone XL and the pipe fitters union, it's pretty damn supportive of big labor right now. And that isn't going to fit very well with the Silicon Valley mentality. So that's 7. And, that's a lot. That's a lot of cases against big tech. John Chambers, did you read that today? He said that the companies he's he's former head of Cisco. The companies he's investing in have no interest in being in Silicon Valley. They don't want to move here. They don't want to be part of this. And he says that's dangerous. That's a bad augury of things to come for the Valley and California.
Yeah, and some of that is unique to Silicon Valley, but some of it isn't. The labor issues are part of technology. Remember, it wasn't just Silicon Valley that ushered in, hey, don't worry about being in a union. We'll give you stock options. It's not Silicon Valley that's having trouble with data concerns. Any company in the social network world, or really that's on your phone whatsoever, is having questions and backlash because of data concerns. All these things are legitimate issues. Remember, Kara Swisher called it techlash. I think we're still seeing the techlash. Again, I think all these issues are going to come home to roost, whether in Silicon Valley or for tech in general. But for 2 reasons, I think they may be put off. 1, fighting the pandemic. And 2, during the pandemic, the only job growth we've seen has been in tech. It's protected California's job numbers to a certain extent. It's kept people working and working safely from home. So I don't think you mess with that right away. But once you can, Silicon Valley has a target on itself. And again, as we said at the top, there's no one else to blame except these companies and these CEOs that have gotten arrogant and super, super wealthy in some ways on the backs of their workers. And
California hasn't done much to help either. I mean, businesses now have the heaviest tax load in California than anything else. This used to be top 10 in education and roads and all the infrastructure things. Now it's down there with Alabama in terms of high school graduation, the quality of education. Our roads are a wreck. I mean, we've been playing with blowing money on social experiments and not doing the blocking and tackling and keeping taxes down that you need to keep a business environment strong. And would you move to California right now? Would you move to would you move to the Bay Area? I mean, you look at the prices out there. I've been driving around looking at real estate for various reasons, and a little tiny 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow, $985,000. Who is going to buy one of those if you're just entering into the workforce? It's not going to happen.
Well, and that's the big, I think, concern that Silicon Valley has to have when it looks to the future, the next 10, 20, 50 years, is because of what you just said, it's discouraging startups here because startups don't have a lot of money yet and their employees don't have a lot of money yet. And if they are saying, hey, you can live here and be in a startup, but not with a family, not if you need any room whatsoever, not if you need a short commute to work. And these are things that other states and other cities are offering. And that's why you're seeing sort of a lure away. On the other hand, you said just the other day you drove around. I'll bet it was sunny when you drove around. It
was 74 degrees.
Yeah, had you been driving around in other parts of the country?
I was talking to a business executive in New York, and there was 2 feet of snow on the ground. And he said,
exactly.
It's going to look like it's going to be here till June. And, I was worried about getting the sunburned. I mean, and I turned to my youngest son. I said, dude, this is why you're here.
Right. Right.
So there's always going to be that. But if California as a state, I mean, individual companies can't do a whole hell of a lot about infrastructure, but that's what the state's supposed to be doing. And when we blow billions on a train to nowhere, going through the Central Valley, instead of connecting, say, the Bay Area with Sacramento, in order to expand Silicon Valley, the state's not helping.
Right, and it has to deal with that. And I think once we get past vaccinating people, that's going to be staring the state in the face. Companies like HPE and Palantir and Oracle that have moved their headquarters,
Yes.
you've got to deal with that, or else other companies are going to follow. Absolutely.
Okay, now let's go through some good news. Netflix, holy moly. You know, Netflix, I believe it's just their growth in the last couple months is bigger than all of Hulu. I mean, that gives you an idea of the scale of Netflix's power. They're no longer going to borrow any money. They're generating so much cash that they can just self-generate growth from here on out. I mean, it's a pretty 200 million subscribers. That's incredible.
Yeah, and that doubles in something like 3.5 years. And give the team there a lot of credit. Netflix was always seen as, well, a safe play in a recession because people like their movies, or sort of a pandemic play because we can't go to the theaters. But Netflix has really kind of stealthily done it in an Amazon way. They spent some money on promotion. They took their losses while gradually growing. Now, they don't need to borrow any money. Their stock price is humongous. And they're known for more than just movies. They're a development studio. And
Yes.
they're really, even as we're in this pandemic, people are saying, even on the other end of this, we may still do things in a Netflix world. And that means a lot. This company is here. It's more than just a pandemic play. It's clearly the way entertainment is being done and is going to be done. They changed how HBO did its business model. And that's saying something, because HBO was around when I was a kid. And there certainly wasn't a Netflix at the time. And so they're changing the way these companies, Disney is saying, oh, we're going to do it streaming now. We're going to be a streaming company. The world is just changing, and they were there first.
Just as an aside, you and I coming out, I started out in PR, then went into journalism. You've always been a journalist. We were always taught, you got to talk to the media. You got to be open. You got to take the CEO and put him out there, talk to the press. Netflix is the absolute counterexample of that. They don't really talk to anybody unless they completely control the message. You're not going to get a lot of interviews going into Netflix as a reporter.
They've done some, and they did more in the early days, but right. They, and maybe that's just Reed Hastings' way. I don't know. Often that sort of flows from the top. If you're Elon Musk and you prefer Twitter to interviews, you don't even need a PR team, right? So that may
you can see Reed walking down Winchester Boulevard with his phalanx of executives and all that. It's not like he's personally unapproachable. He's media unapproachable.
Yeah, and he's made it clear his focus is going to be, number one, Netflix, and number two, education. He's helped a lot, donated a ton of money. But yeah, he doesn't do a whole lot of press. But even when he does, it's to say, this is what we were doing the whole time, and people are sort of catching up to us. And he's got a good point. Okay,
the Loon swoon. That's our next item. So Google's no more balloons transmitting down. I mean, I was under the impression that was starting to work. I mean, they were doing stuff in Africa and everything else.
I guess it has to work. If you're the wonderful thing about Alphabet is it makes so much money that it can burn a lot of cash on these Project X, sort of what they call the moon shots, right? Sort of their experimental.
Right, but they took it from Project X and moved it into the next phase, which made it look like it's going to happen. And they're doing stuff in Peru. And after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, I mean, it was looking like this was going to be a major initiative by Google. And it moved into the operations category with its own president and all that. And suddenly, never mind.
Well, but right. I mean, and that's the other side of this, Mike, is that if you are in this world and you get a shot, you've got to deliver. And they weren't generating cash. In fact, they were losing quite a bit of it, which, sort of makes sense. I remember when Loon was launched, if you will. It literally is a project to launch big balloons up in the sky and beam internet down into developing nations that wouldn't have internet. Facebook is trying this with, I think, gliders. You're seeing companies trying to do this to get their product.
Well, it looks like it's going to be satellites, right?
I think so, right. And it is satellites large, but in some areas that aren't getting the internet, Loon was going to do it with giant balloons. And on the one hand, it was like, what a great project to bring internet to those developing nations that don't have it. On the other hand, though, once it became a business, you had to sort of shake your head and say, how is this going to be profitable? And fit in
Yeah,
with.
where's the business model? Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's too bad that they stopped it, but it was kind of doomed, I think, once they gave it that that business sheen, like, hey, now we're going to give it a CEO and we expect profitability and et cetera, et cetera. Ugh, that's a tough thing for balloons flying in the sky, beaming down the internet. But it's a great idea. And I hope that they somehow manage to spread internet all over the world.
Speaking of Google, Google and Fitbit, I thought this was a fait accompli. I thought that everything was signed, but now we're hearing a name from the recent past, Amy Klobuchar, who now runs the committee, saying, oh, I don't know about this. You know, we have, even though we're past the deadline, apparently Congress still thinks that it can make a decision on this deal.
And this is part of tech's backlash, because Google buys Fitbit. The first thing you think is, wait, that's my personal data. What are they going to do with it? And that's on them. So I'm not surprised that you know, a go-getter of a politician like Amy Klobuchar.
They poison that well. Do we really would we really trust them with our heart and, you know, data?
I don't think we do, and that's on them. And so I'm not surprised there's backlash. Do you know what Amy Klobuchar called her brand new book? Antitrust. Come on, right there. So, you know, these are going to be the people that are going to go after tech, and tech is a juicy target, not by bad luck. It's a juicy target because of what they've done.
Yeah, well, this is a cell phone. I mean, they scored against a goal against themselves. I mean, they should have thought this thing through. I really think it was arrogance, ultimately. You know, that we're too big. We're now a global corporation. We don't have to worry about the concerns of individual nations and governments. You know, we're beyond that now.
But also think about your users and your employees. Some of these data missteps, and they go back to Cambridge Analytica, but there are so many others, were absolutely avoidable. And maybe it is, maybe like you say, maybe their arrogance got in the way of that. But also, it's just shameful to see, and people are saying that it's shameful to see how rich Amazon is getting, and then how little the people in the factories or the—
You're in that warehouse.
Yeah, the warehouses and Whole Foods, and you know, you can afford to pay those people bigger wages and still be $1 trillion company. And so it's that sort of cell phone, like you say, that's putting people to look at big tech in a negative light.
You know, it harkens back to the beginning of the Valley with Hewlett and Packard. I mean, the whole HP way was trust. Employees have to trust us. We have to trust our employees. We trust our customers, and our customers absolutely have to trust in us. And that was considered, you know, by the 90s, that was considered an anachronistic attitude. We don't need to worry about that stuff anymore because tech is going to solve everything. And now we're getting a big lesson that some of these eternal verities remain so. You know, just like we deluded ourselves in 1999 that when I was running Forbes ASAP, and some of my reporters came to me and said, you know, Mike, all this talk about profits, you know, that's an antiquated, you old guys, I was like 45, you old guys, you know, we don't need to worry about profits anymore. It's about market share. It's all about market share. And then, you know, 6 months later, they got the big life lesson about how companies have to be profitable. And I think we're getting the big lesson right now. You know, there's talk of, you know, people are starting to demand, I think I read a New Republic or one of those that calling for some of the leadership of Facebook to resign for being untruthful. I mean, this is, you want to play on the big stage. This is, you know, this is what the arrows are going to start coming at you. And now they're not dealing with it very well, I have to say. Next, a federal judge who is hearing both the U.S. Justice Department and state antitrust cases against Google said on Thursday the states have to start turning over documents. They're due on February 4th in preparation for the trial. So it's going forward. You know,
yeah, some of these things are. I think it'll. If I had to bet, I'd say it's a slight backseat to fighting this pandemic, but it had a lot of momentum even during the Republican years, and people were surprised by that. But I think data and payments and business and how you handle your stuff, it's bipartisan, and so I think both sides are going to come for tech.
We talked about the pandemic and the rollout of the vaccines, by the way. Are we going to see a backlash? I mean, some states like West Virginia are almost done, and New York and California seem to be blowing it. I mean, they're actually losing vaccines because they're not implementing them, not getting them out there. I mean, is this going to create a political backlash too? I mean,
It already has. I mean, there's a recall Gavin Newsom, movement.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of signatures too. But I mean, is this going to tell it now? I mean, it's like I'm hearing from people over 70 years old saying, when? People in their 60s with chronic diseases are going, weren't we supposed to have that vaccine by now? What the hell's going on? I mean, could be very brutal to state governments if this keeps going on like this, because people are expecting to get back to life now, and every business that dies now because of the delayed rollout in certain states of the vaccine, that's on the state now. You can't say, oh, it's the pandemic. Now it's the implementation of the vaccination program.
Right. I mean, at some point, it may be said that it was a bad idea to give this over to the states and that it should have been a big national thing, which would have been controversial also, but maybe it would have worked better. I mean, there are going to be questions asked every step of the way, and deservedly so. It's not working so far. And so you have every stage. You've got the 75s, you got the 65s, you got the essential workers, frontliners saying, where are the shots? We're supposed to be inundated with this vaccine so far, and we just haven't.
Yeah, and West Virginia just said first come, first serve. Just come on down, get your shots. And they did millions. I mean, they actually have done it now. Well, right. We're putting all these different rules on it, and who are the special people that get it, and it's a mess. I don't think it helps the image of government right now. Okay, next up, Intel. Got this one from Grove. Intel said Thursday it has made substantial progress addressing serious manufacturing problems with its next generation of microprocessor. Okay, Bob said, I'll believe it when I see it. All of a sudden this company's losing billions of dollars. They're falling behind the competition. And then 2 months later, oh, we got it all fixed now. Everything's okay. We're coming back.
It's early, but Intel did two things it needed to do. One, it replaced the CEO. And so it said, all right, we're making the change at the top because this all starts at the top. That was a good admission. The second thing it did just a couple of days ago is have a strong earnings report. And that was a surprise.
Yes.
It also gave investors, and you saw the response on Wall Street, it gave investors something to exhale about. And now
it's been a twofer. You got Pat Gelsinger coming in, and everybody's going, that's the right guy. That's the guy that can save Intel. Next thing, their numbers look good.
Yeah.
Now, have they gone a bridge too far by announcing they've solved every problem they have, and now they're going to go to 7 nanometer?
I mean, that will take time, but it bought itself some time, and it bought themselves some trust by doing those two things.
Yes. They're doing all the right things. I just hope they're not indulging in hyperbole, because when you fall that far behind in technology, it's not one thing. It's going to be a bunch of things. And I wonder if they've really solved all of them, or they've just solved the most obvious one, and they think they can get through this now. I mean, I think this is a dangerous moment for them.
Right. I don't think they've solved the chip problem, because that's what got them in this predicament in the first place. And better than anyone, that doesn't get solved in 3 months. So it's going to take time. But again, for a company that has made some decidedly wrong moves in the last year, within a week, it made two really, really important moves and caught a break. And I think that's why you saw the stock price rise so much in such a short period of time. That was a big jump for Intel, especially a beleaguered Intel. But it's still behind considerably as a market cap of, say, NVIDIA, which has been moving quickly and making the right moves for years now. And Intel has some catching up to do in more than just its stock price.
Well, Intel did it before. I mean, it was leading the world. It fell behind TI, and it literally turned the company upside down and turned it around. So Intel has the capacity to do it, and I think Gelsinger's a guy that can do it. Let's just see if they can, execute it. That's still, I think, up in the air.
Yes.
And finally, another Intel matter. This is the 50th anniversary of Intel taking out that first ad for the 4004, announcing the computer on a chip. And it wasn't really a computer on a chip, it was a chipset, but it was just 4 chips, which was a revolutionary invention. And it literally did change everything. It just as Intel predicted. And I think, and it happened in our lifetimes. So, I think we should honor the head of the team, Federico Fagin, old friend of mine, Ted Hoff, a neighbor of mine, Stan Major, and Matsuishi Shima. Those guys literally did change the world. They changed our lives completely, and they are way overdue for a Nobel Prize.
I will give you all of that. You're absolutely right. And while we're talking anniversaries, let me end with just one final thing. January 22nd is a big day for Mac fans. It was in 1984 on this very day that ad, the famous ad, debuted, played once in the Super Bowl, you may remember. And that was, 36 years ago, right? 1984. So there you have it.
Well, a lot of people claim they were there, but I was actually at the Mac introduction at Flint Center at Deanza, and they sent me a whole press packet. I was there for The Economist, the UK Economist covering it, and they sent me a whole packet of stuff. And after the press announcement and the event, I threw it away. And it's like, oh no! I mean, looking back, I could have sold that for a ton of money. But I will say, everything they say about that moment when Steve lifted the cover off that first Mac on the pedestal in the middle of Flint Center and it said hello, that was a spine-tingling moment and one of the great moments in business history.
Absolutely. I wasn't there, but I do.
Oh, you were a child. You were a boy.
Do remember the commercial, though.
That's it. That's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. And of course, now YouTube. Stay safe. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.